What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Plenty of Champions League talk here in the first segment with the first legs of the semifinal now complete. And then second segment today, some MLS kind of news and notes, Open Cup games, a couple coaching changes that have occurred. So I'll be getting to all of that later in the show. But there's one place to start. That is the Champions League and what happened in these two first legs of the semifinals. Beginning with Real Madrid, Manchester City. The big takeaway here, it's kind of two parts, but it gets into the same big idea, is that both coaches are going to be very, very happy with where they're at. From the Manchester City side, unlike previous Champions League runs, and unlike last year's semifinal, Manchester City kept control of this game. That is Pep Guardiola's thing. He wants that control, and Manchester City had it. Real Madrid go ahead. It doesn't snowball. They have that good little patch at the beginning of the second half. They don't get the second goal. Slowly, Manchester City kind of regain control of the game. They don't let it spiral. And they keep it with that one goal. That's what Pep wants. On Carlo Ancelotti's side, game plan worked brilliantly. Manchester City offered next to nothing in attack, which is an incredibly difficult thing to pull off, but Real Madrid did it, right? You sit back, you give them the ball, and you try not to let them be dangerous with it. And that's exactly what happened. And then you try and hit them on the counter, you try and hit them in transition, and you trust your front three to finish the opportunities you create. And it was working perfectly until Kevin De Bruyne happened. And I saw Antonio Rudiger kind of make some comments that basically he was saying, look, we kept him in check. We're not intimidated going to the second leg. And he's right. They were brilliant defensively. So if you're Ancelotti, you go into that second leg knowing it's going to look a lot like this one probably because Manchester City are going to have the ball. And Real Madrid are fine with that. You proved you figured out how to do what you need to defensively to make sure that they don't run you over and to basically make them toothless. I mean, you look at that. I think the XG total I saw from StatsBomb was 0.5, if I remember correctly. And let's make one thing very clear here. Real Madrid had the better chances in that game, which is the really interesting part of this for me. Because Pep's going to applaud the fact that they had control for a vast majority of that game. And that the little bit that they didn't, they were able to navigate and it didn't snowball on them like it has in years past. The other part of that is, if that is how Manchester City got through this first leg, and of course, you take the 1-1 any day of the week. You just got to win a game in Manchester, and you're going to extra time as long as you don't lose in Manchester. You take that 100% of the time if you're Pep. But they didn't get there because of Pep's system, which to me is the ultimate commentary here. And where Pep is going to continue to be evaluated when it comes to the Champions League until Manchester City win one, is can you win with this system? And I will continue to say, until I see an ability to adapt and to not rely entirely on this system, my answer is no. This was completely different from last year when I went to bat for Pep and basically said, look, it's Real Madrid, things happen. That was not a systematic flaw. That was just Champions League drama and Real Madrid, right? They had that one. They had scored the goals. They looked really, really good. they were awful in this first leg. And then De Bruyne popped up, and got to go back and give Real Madrid credit for their goal, too. Sensational. Vinicius, amazing. Camavinga was arguably the best player on the field. He just flies up the left wing, he sets up the goal. Vinicius finishes it excellently. That's what Real Madrid do, right? That's right in the playbook of how they wanted this to go. They don't need many opportunities, but when they get them, they're going to take them. And City are just kind of going along, not creating anything, not getting Haaland involved, nothing direct. And De Bruyne comes out of nowhere with a rocket very similar to Vinicius's to get the goal. That is about Kevin De Bruyne, his individual brilliance, which I've talked about time and time again. To me, there are two players on this team that you can't just throw into the Manchester City machine, quote unquote. That they are that valuable even in a team this good. And it's De Bruyne and it's Haaland. And so my theme has been Haaland gives you the ability to improvise and do things different and to just create goals out of nothing. And that's why I was willing to be open to the possibility that Manchester City could actually win this competition this time. And that I was picking them to win. I would argue my theory still held up. It was just De Bruyne and not Haaland who delivered that moment. Right? That is nothing to do with system. That is just Kevin De Bruyne being one of the best players in the world. Sometimes that's what it takes because you're not always going to be able to execute your system to perfection. And the question becomes, what do you do when that happens? And to Man City's credit, and specifically De Bruyne's credit, they found a way to survive a game in which they did not play well at all. And so it sets up this fascinating second leg because Real Madrid can just do the exact same thing like I mentioned before. They created plenty of chances. They could have had a second goal. And they can just sit back and absorb pressure again. The question is, can they do it for 180 minutes instead of 90? Or are we going to get into chaos mode? Let's say Manchester City get the opening goal, and now Real Madrid really have to go and push forward. Can Manchester City then keep the game within kind of their comfortable space? Or is it going to turn into chaos the way that Real Madrid have been able to turn pretty much every big Champions League tie they've been in recently into chaos? And then you get something like last season. It could go either way, depending on who gets that first goal. And then you start getting kind of the full analysis of this, because we just don't know yet. I can make the argument either way, and that's really where I'm at after this first leg. I can sit here and say, look, Pep's system created nothing. You can't win a Champions League playing that way. If they can't win this one, in a year where Real Madrid are not factors in La Liga, as good as they are in the Champions League, and as much as their style of play lends itself to the Champions League, and you're playing two Milan clubs who haven't even guaranteed that they're going to be in the Champions League next season, you're facing one of them in the final. If they can't win this one, what Champions League can they win? But on the other side, if they look a lot better in the second leg, and you go, look, they found a way to get the goal without it being perfect, and in a bad performance, they still got out of the away leg against Real Madrid with a goal and with the score tied. And then they did what they had to do at home. Now we're having a very different conversation. The question is, what will the second leg look like? Because the way this played out, just both teams are happy still. That's really my big takeaway, is that you can't say one got the better of the other. Because this is the ultimate test for Pep Guardiola's system. This Real Madrid team and the way they play, right? They are more than comfortable to give you the ball. You make one mistake, they're going to punish you. They're lethal on the counter. They will sit back and they will take Haaland out of the game because Manchester City will not play to Haaland's strengths. This is the kind of game where it's fair to have a conversation about how much value Haaland can bring. Game to game, it's ridiculous because he's just so good, he's going to find a way. See the 51 goals he scored this season. But when City are so condensed and there is so little space because Real Madrid aren't really moving up the field, it makes it much more difficult to get Haaland involved. And specifically to play to Haaland's strength, which is playing balls over the top, right? Forcing center backs to deal with his pace and his physical prowess. He's still a very good player, but he's a much less dangerous one in a game like this first leg. So we are still waiting for all of that to get sorted out. But it should not be lost here that although Manchester City, I would argue, should be the happier of the two teams with this result, Real Madrid were the better team in this game. They executed this at a higher level. The game was played more on their terms. And Kevin De Bruyne came up huge. Again, this guy does not get enough credit, as much credit as he gets. I still think he is severely underrated. That's just me, but time after time in moments like this, he just comes up, and how many times has he delivered goals like that kind of out of nowhere? And you look at what he's done as they've turned this around in the Premier League and started to look like they're never going to lose again. How many of those big goals were Kevin De Bruyne? There just is no comparable player in the world to him. And so he came up huge again. Now the question is, can City find a way to create some offense out of this? Because that's not getting you through leg 2. Or can Real Madrid take it one step further and not just keep City in check, but really get the game into that chaos kind of frantic tempo that they thrive in? Because you're going to, on the Real Madrid side, just like I would argue City can't rely on getting an offensive performance, getting another goal if they're going to play this way in attack. I would argue Real Madrid can't afford to go into a second leg with City being this comfortable. They have to cause them more problems. It's just fascinating. It is so finely poised. It should be a phenomenal second leg at the Etihad. The other semifinal, an all-Milan affair, Inter 2, AC Milan 0. I've been making this point for a couple weeks, both on video and on Substack, in my 5 things from the week. I know he's not going to repeat as Serie A Player of the Season or whatever the award Leao won the league MVP thing last year, because Napoli's been so good, and that's just how those kind of awards work. You're going to have a hard time convincing me there's a more valuable player in Italy. And so he comes off I think it was 11 minutes in over the weekend. He tries to give it a go, and he can't play in this first leg. And look what happens. And Dzeko smashes home a corner. Terrific goal. Hedrick Mkhitaryan adds a second a few minutes later. 11 minutes in, it's 2-0. And for the rest of the first half, AC Milan had, like Manchester City, nothing to offer going forward. And then soon after that, you lose Ismail Benacer, who's your other creative player who might have been able to give you something. And so now Brahim Diaz is basically the only creative force out there. And that's not even exactly what he does. And he is certainly not good enough to carry an attack in a Champions League semifinal. This is why Leao is so, so important to this team. And Benacer too. And so you're without both of them. And, Chalagu smashes the post. It could have been 3. Lautaro Martinez then destroys Simon Kjaer. gets the penalty called. VAR correctly overturns it. If you're overturning it because he dove, that's a yellow. This is one of my things. There should be more yellow cards for simulation. If you want people to stop diving, punish them for it. That was a dive. Thankfully, VAR got the call right. But again, just Inter applying pressure. And then finally, last few minutes of the first half and through most of the second half, AC Milan kind of figured out. Sandro Tonali hits the post. And they were able to at least keep things in check. They created some chances, nothing too spectacular, but it was a lot better than the first half. And Inter had a chance here or there, but it was nowhere near as good as the first half. And so it ends 2-0. If you're AC Milan, with the way this thing started and the two players that you lost in the between the weekend and the first 30 minutes or whatever it was when Benacer came off in this game, you got to be okay with this. This is about as good as you could have asked for considering the situation. Because Inter had some chances to basically end this thing and make it 3. And yes, you would have loved to get it to 2-1. But on the balance of play, to me, that's asking for too much. So you keep it at 2. You get the first goal in the second leg, and all of a sudden we're having a different conversation. And this whole home and away thing is kind of weird here because obviously it's the same stadium. Yes, you're going to have more Inter fans in the second leg, but you don't have away goals. It's still your home stadium. To me, being down after the quote-unquote home leg isn't as big of a deal as it is in a traditional matchup. You kind of got to throw the rules out for this because it's such a amazing confluence of things happening here with these two rivals playing for a spot in the Champions League final. Rivalry games in general, you throw out all logic, and then you take this to even another level here. So you got another chance. If you get the first goal, all of a sudden, game on. And you might be able to get Leao back. You might be able to get Benacer back. So you're okay with it. And if you're Inter, you got to feel pretty good about this too. Yes, you're disappointed you didn't finish it. And Mike Grella kept making this point, and I agree that they could have been a little bit more aggressive and a little more attentive defensively in that second half. They kind of went through the motions for a little while, and it nearly cost them a goal. They're going to have to be better seeing out the game in the second leg unless they can get the first goal. They got to play with a little bit more urgency and a little bit more purpose. But by and large, they were excellent. And they are the better team. And they're playing better right now. They're not giving up goals. They're scoring 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 every game at this point. I think it's 5 of their last 6 they've scored multiple goals. And 3 of those 6 were at least 3, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. They're playing extraordinarily well. And give credit to Simone Inzaghi, too. He picks Mkhitaryan and Dzeko over Lukaku and Brozovic. They both scored. Now, did he get lucky or did he know something? That's for him to, I guess, kind of know. But he got it right. And it made a huge difference in the beginning of that game. And then he was able to bring those guys on and help see it out. And Lukaku was really good when he came on, and he's gotten in better form. So now you have him as an option in the second leg, too. It just all comes back to this main point for me, which is the value of Rafael Leao. I said when these two teams made it to the semis, the question will be, if AC Milan are going to continue to advance in this tournament, what happens when they get hit in the mouth? What happens when they can't score the first goal and then sit back defensively? And now we're finding out, right? They didn't have a terrific response. They kind of got going in the second half. And defensively, it was a disaster. That's the other part of this, too. Yes, Martinez dove. That wasn't a penalty. But he made Simone Kjaer look silly. Mkhitaryan just running through. and I think it was it a Chirby? One of the center backs also had a run, just 20, 30 yards completely unopposed. It has to be better defensively because Inter are going to punish you. Whether that's Çalhanoğlu, whether that's Mkhitaryan, whether that's Martinez, Lukaku, Dzeko, the wing backs, whoever it is. You can't just let them waltz into space the way AC Milan did in this first leg. Because there is a way that this works for AC Milan, a way that they've gotten to this point, and it's by being ahead and absorbing pressure. And then you have Leao to hit on the counter. And now you don't have Leao, at least in this first leg. And now you don't have a counterattack because you got to go score the goals. Eventually, that formula was not going to... Just a very simple philosophy. I talk about this all the time. You got to be able to win multiple ways in knockout tournaments because you're not going to be able to get everything. It's the same thing with Manchester City. And the same thing with LAFC. This is what LAFC have been able to do so well under Steve Cherundolo. Things are not always going to go your way, especially when you want to control things. You got to be able to adapt. You got to be able to find another way to make it happen. AC Milan, through the knockout stage, have been reliant on this. We get the first goal and we sit back philosophy. They can't do that anymore. So we're going to see what they have and what they can offer in the second half, what they're made of in the second leg, because they're playing a better team, a team that's going to have home support, that is in better form, and now has a 2-goal lead. This Inter team, to me, has some UConn, to continue with an NCAA tournament analogy, some UConn vibes to it. Not in the sense that we're going to look up and go, well, they really were, one of the best 3 teams in the world. We just didn't see it because they had this weird stretch. I'm not going that far. They are still way behind Napoli in their own league. But there was always this feeling with that UConn team that if they figured out, they kind of get through this weird stretch they had in Big East play, their ceiling is so high that they can reach this incredible level, and if they're playing really well, they can win a national championship. It was always there, they just didn't always play like it. And now you're seeing Inter peak at the right time. They had that stretch, they couldn't score, they couldn't beat an Italian team, and all of a sudden it's turning around for them here. This is a team collectively from a talent standpoint that is much better than where they are in the Serie A table. And this is a team that is better than their crosstown rivals. And now it's all starting to come together. We're going to have to wait and see if they can finish it out and get to the Champions League final in that second leg. I'm going to take my first break. When I come back, some MLS news. We got some coaching changes, U.S. Open Cup games, and a U.S. men's national team under-20 World Cup roster to discuss. All of that coming up next. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in today. It is MLS news and notes time. Some things have happened on the managerial front I want to talk about. Had a round of 32 games in the U.S. Open Cup. Those are also continuing tonight. And we have a U.S. men's national team U20, it's a tongue twister, World Cup squad that was just announced this afternoon. So starting with the managerial changes. Gerard Struber out. It just ended a little bit earlier than it was supposed to. Here is the thing to keep in mind with coaches. And I first heard this philosophy from ESPN's Bomani Jones, so I want to give him credit, and I've taken it and run with it. Coaches, you're either going to look for reasons to get rid of them or reasons to keep them. Right? If the front office likes a coach, they're going to go to bat for that coach and find any way they can to keep them. If there are external forces pushing that coach out, it's going to be much easier to let them go, right? There aren't many coaches who have to be fired or who have to stay. A lot of it is kind of personal preference based on the situation. And Gerard Struber did not give the New York Red Bulls any reason to keep him. From the totally understandable personal choice to, right, he wanted to be closer to his family. So it's not like he was committed, he wanted to be there for the next decade, which is certainly not a reason to fire anybody. That's not why he got fired. But again, it's another circumstance that is in the favor of making this decision. And then you've got the actual two big reasons why this happened. They've been awful. Right? So you're not going to bat for this coach probably believing that he's the guy to get you out of this and that you should stick with him. And then, of course, the big one is the Dante Van Zier situation and how he handled it. People have been calling for him to be fired, and for good reason, since that happened. So you have everything going against you. In order to keep your job, you've got to deliver on the field. And that just wasn't happening. So Struber made it, for a variety of reasons, made this really easy for the Red Bulls. There was just no reason to keep him. And he was, this was a mutual agreement. He was happy to leave too. It was time to just cut ties and try and start this over when you have enough time to salvage the season. That's the other part of this. They have been injured, and that needs to be acknowledged. Luquinhas and Lewis Morgan, who was great last season. And then, of course, I was talking preseason about, can Dante Van Zier be the guy to elevate the Red Bulls from a playoff team to a team that could actually make some noise in the playoffs, that you feel like is at least some kind of dark horse contender. And then Dante Van Zier excuses himself by doing what he did. So now you're out him and two of your other most important players. And you lost Aaron Long. That's all working against this too. That needs to be part of the story here. So if you can get somebody in, if you can get these guys back, and you can stay healthy, I do think there's a chance to salvage this and at least make a run at getting into the playoffs. And if they get in, who knows what happens. But if they weren't headed down that path the way this was going with Struber, I would have had no problem with him being fired for his handling of the Van Zier situation. I was really irritated with the lack of accountability. But they decided to keep him at least a little while. Now he is gone. There is enough time to turn this thing around. I still generally believe in this roster that it's, not where they are in the table is not reflective of the team that they have. But you are running out of time. So it's going to be, and the other part of this too is, since you made this decision now, there are going to be some coaches that become available here when the European season ends. So doing this as early as you can was the smart choice. It should have happened even earlier, but Gerard Struber out at the New York Red Bulls. The other coaching decision, a little bit more surprising one, Ezra Hendrickson gone from the Chicago Fire. And this is again a really good example of what I was just talking about, where you can kind of paint this any way you want. You can look at it and say, they haven't been particularly good, right? They've blown some leads. They should be higher in the table. There's nothing to really indicate they're going in the right direction. And that Hendrickson is making them better. Or, if you want to believe in Hendrickson, you look at it and say, they've lost by multiple goals once. They have not lost at home. Now, 5 of those 6 games at home have been draws. To the right, they're close, but they're just not kind of finishing. And the designated players aren't doing what they need to do, which is the biggest problem of all. And that's not on the coach. Generally speaking. Once they're on yes, the coach plays a role. But that's a personnel thing. That's a front office thing. But it's easier to remove the coach, so when things are disappointing, that's where everybody goes, whether it's right or wrong. I'm an Ezra Hendrickson fan. To me, he deserved a lot more time. To me, there was progress here, and they weren't all that far out from a playoff spot. It wasn't a disastrous start. They're just missing that final piece to actually put together some wins. Because they've been competitive. I would argue they have been noticeably better this season. But you've won 1 out of 6 home games. You're also unbeaten at home. But you've won 1 out of your 6 home games. Right? They need to pick up points at a much better rate. And it wasn't happening with Hendrickson. But to me, this is more about the roster. And about him not being given what he needs to succeed. And so it's easy to point the finger at him and to make the managerial change, as opposed to addressing the issues that are going to continue to plague this team because they're just not good enough. This one was disappointing for me. I thought he had done some good things. And I applaud him for kind of going to bat for himself in the statement he sent out afterward by basically saying we were headed in the right direction and sticking by what he was doing there. I believe he has every right to do that. But the results weren't there, so Chicago makes the move as well. So we've already got a couple MLS openings early in the season. Going to be interesting to see how quickly these get filled. And, these are 2 teams that aren't in kind of rebuild mode. These are 2 teams trying to take it to another level. And now you're taking a step back and kind of starting over with a new coach. We'll see how that all turns out in New York and in Chicago. Always want to give a shout out to the U.S. Open Cup as well. Not as many upsets on night 1 of the round of 32, but some phenomenal games. This tournament always delivers. I will continue to say people need to care about this. This needs to become a bigger deal within U.S. soccer. It's a phenomenal event. And we haven't even completed the round of 16 and figuring out who those 16 teams are. And there are plenty of what you would consider, MLS favorites, teams near the top of the table in both conferences who are already out. Starting with the New England Revolution, who lost at home to the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Then that was your big upset, and yes, there are always caveats about what squad went out there and all of that. Who actually played some guys, who didn't, there's context that's important. But part of this is when you are, for example, in Orlando City last season, right? When you're one of these teams that probably aren't going to win MLS Cup, this becomes another trophy you can win. And so every round you advance, you're also looking to see, okay, how many teams left are you actually scared of? Right? Are LAFC, Seattle, the Union, Cincinnati, and the Revs all still in this thing by the quarterfinals? Or are there one or two teams that you feel like are elite MLS teams that would, once they start taking this competition seriously and putting out a best 11 kind of thing, you don't like your chances against? So the Revs are the best team in the Eastern Conference so far. Gone. Philadelphia Union. Gone. Now, this was this was quite a game. Minnesota United are the team to knock out the Union. Minnesota go 2-0 up. The Union get a goal back. Kai Wagner scores with essentially the last kick of the game to send it to extra time. Minnesota go ahead again. Kai Wagner scores with the last kick of extra time to send it to a penalty shootout. And the game was ultimately decided when Kai Wagner's penalty gets saved. It was everything you want a U.S. Open Cup game to be. Wild, unlikely heroes, all kinds of, Chris Donovan scores his first goal for the Union, unexpected contributors, guys coming off the bench scoring all the goals. It was just pure entertainment. Right, so now you're looking, okay, the Union are gone, the Revs are gone, and LAFC nearly lost to Monterey Bay FC, except Eldin Jupukovic saved, came up big in the penalty shootout and converted the penalty of his own. And so LAFC do survive as they're trying to, capture every trophy available. But they almost lost in the round of 32 as well. And we haven't even gotten to the second set of games in the round of 32. This is already, yes, you're not going to have, last season there were all these USL League One teams, and obviously you had the Sacramento Republic getting all the way to the final. It doesn't look like we're going to have the same kind of upsets this season. There'll always be some, but not as many as we saw last year. But this is opening up very, very quickly for some MLS team is going to be able to kind of redefine their season by this tournament. And that's always one of my favorite things is, right, it's an FA Cup run from, the example would be Brighton, except for Brighton got bigger things to play for at this point. When Watford got there, when, was it Wigan won the FA Cup the year they got relegated? I think that's who it was. That it's something to hold on to and something to get excited about in a season that's not gone particularly well. And so all these teams that keep advancing, as your MLS favorites get knocked out, we could have a really, really fun kind of quarterfinal, semifinal, final of teams that are going to really, really care about this because it's a trophy that's within their grasp. Whereas, the Revs have bigger things to worry about, quite frankly. Yes, they would have liked to advance. The Union would have liked to advance. They're trying to, home field advantage in the playoffs, supporters shield, winning the Eastern Conference, all that kind of stuff. So I always want to see the teams that take this really, really seriously and place a lot of value on it succeed. And it's setting up to be a very interesting season in that regard. The other thing I want to mention real quickly before we get out of here today is this U.S. men's national team U20 World Cup squad. Some of the players in it, one noticeable one who was not. You've got 10 MLS clubs represented with plenty of guys that have legitimate MLS experience. Some of your notable names in here, Gaga Slina is in net. Chelsea have very little use for him at this moment in time, so they let him go. Caleb Wiley has had a really good season for Atlanta. He's on this squad. Daniel Edelman, I've been really impressed with him with the Red Bulls. He's there. Kevin Paredes from Wolfsburg is there. Obed Vargas of the Seattle Sounders is there. You've got your Philadelphia Union trio. Jack McGlynn, Brandon Craig. I'm blanking on the third one. Quinn Sullivan, who, Quinn Sullivan was one of the best players during CONCACAF qualifying. There was a fourth Union player in this quartet of guys who helped this team qualify. Oh, Kate Cowell, also forgot to mention him from San Jose, right? Legit MLS players. This is not the best team the U.S. could have sent, but a very, very good one in terms of getting some of the biggest names. And also Joshua Widener from Louisville City, who I'm really high on as well. There's a lot of exciting names on this team. The one guy who isn't there, who was so good during qualifying, is Paxton Aronson. Frankfurt wouldn't let him go. Which, on one hand, is a really good sign for Paxton Aronson's career that Frankfurt didn't want to let him go for this. Because that means, and he's been getting at least some minutes in the Bundesliga, that they want him to be part of the rest of the season. That also means you're missing a very, very, very good player for this team who was excellent, helped him qualify, and is missing out on this opportunity that who knows if he's going to get something like this again. So there's kind of this double-edged sword with it that teams have to agree to release these players for this competition. Generally, that wasn't a big deal. The MLS teams, for the most part, were amenable to that. As you've seen all of these MLS guys listed on the roster. Not every single team, but most of them. And I think I saw Jim Kern say something about, I'm not going to be the guy who denies them this opportunity, basically. What are we doing if we just tell them they can't play in this? So that's very good to see. The flip side is, though, that means you're getting guys who teams have agreed to let go, such as Gaga Salina. Now, Salina is going to get his future sorted out next season anyway. It's not like, it's just a weird situation he was in. So, absolutely, you let him go. He's not going to play right now. He's not going to be playing for Chelsea next season either. So that makes all the sense in the world. It gets a little dicier with a guy like Paxton Aronson who's actually getting some minutes. Would you have hoped Frankfurt would have said, you know what, it's just not the worst thing in the world if we're going to be without him for these last few games? Yeah, I would have really liked to see him in this tournament. But the flip side is that means they value him. So you can spin that one kind of both ways. But ultimately, I really do like this roster. I just love the young MLS guys that have legit MLS experience. Jack McGlynn's basically taking the starting spot with the Union. Cade Cowell's been really good for San Jose. Caleb Wiley's been sensational, like I said, for Atlanta. I've liked what I've seen from Daniel Edelman. You can go down the list. There's a lot of experienced guys even at this U20 level. And they were really, really good during qualifying, and they were really fun to watch. So you get another opportunity with this group. Be sure to check that out. I believe the tournament starts May 20th. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's when it gets underway. So it's coming up here soon. And so just be sure to keep an eye on this U20 World Cup. You don't get one of these every day. This is the future of the U.S. men's national team, at least to a certain extent, kind of your next group of stars. And they feature many recognizable names if you follow MLS. I'm going to take one more break and then come back and finish with the weekend look ahead, like always. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one final time to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time for the weekend look ahead, starting in England. Weekend gets underway. Newcastle at Leeds United on Saturday. This is must pick up points territory for Leeds. Newcastle still trying to secure a Champions League spot. Really, really intriguing matchup there. Tottenham and Aston Villa on Saturday. the Europa League hopefuls, as I will call them. Wolves at Manchester United on Saturday. Can United stop the bleeding? I also mentioned this on my weekend roundup. Most of the games for United this moving forward, starting with this one, are at home. I believe it's 3 of the last 4. They have been awful on the road. But they should get this done and wrap up a top 4 spot just by doing what they are supposed to do at home. That starts with this game. They should beat Wolves. But all of a sudden, it gets real interesting if they lose this one too. And Liverpool keep surging. Maybe Brighton starts. I mean, Brighton's got a brutal schedule. But if Brighton pulls off, 3 wins out of 4 or something like that, this could get real dicey for Manchester United. Taking care of Wolves would go a long way to securing that top 4 spot. Then Sunday in the Premier League, Manchester City at Everton, another top 4, obviously in this case title challenger, and a team trying to avoid relegation. This is going to be a big weekend in the relegation race because of these Leeds and Everton games and who they're playing. They're both at home, and they're both against teams you would expect them to lose to. Granted, you would have expected Everton to lose against Brighton, and they blew the doors off them. Everton have been really good the past couple games. If one of them can find a win here, that might be enough with the other games they have remaining. And it could really spell trouble for the other teams down there. Specifically Nottingham Forest and Leicester. Now, if Everton and Leeds lose, and Leicester plays Liverpool on Monday, and Leicester somehow beat Liverpool, now we're talking about a different conversation again. So, I'm always fascinated by these relegation versus top 4, where they both have something to play for, and you've got an Everton team playing really well with the challenge of facing Manchester City. Leicester just had it, Leeds just had it, neither of them could take any points off them. Can Sean Dyche pull it off? Then, Brighton at Arsenal on Sunday. Brighton have just been all over the place. As I said, got destroyed by Everton, destroyed Wolves before that, beat Manchester United, lost Nottingham Forest. Who knows what you're getting from the Seagulls at this point? And Arsenal are hanging around, making Manchester City win every single game and keep pace with them. This is the next step. They can't drop any more points. They got to win out if they got a shot at winning this title. Then, on top of that, you also have one of the best soccer events of the year, the Championship playoffs. Saturday, Luton Town at Sunderland. Luton Town back after last season coming so close. Sunderland could be back in the Premier League. What a story this has been. Can they get to the playoff final? Can they actually do this? And then Sunday, your other matchup, Middlesbrough at Coventry City. Sorry, too many C City teams. Coventry City, who also have their own incredible story about where they were. Middlesbrough's been kind of up and down, but not really a factor in the promotion race the last few seasons. So 4 really interesting teams for different reasons. Luton Town, just small club. What they've been able to do is incredible. Sunderland, obviously. Middlesbrough, a bigger club recently in the Premier League. And Coventry just kind of coming out of nowhere here. So really, really good matchups in the championship playoff. That starts this weekend as well. Spain. Getafe at Real Madrid on Saturday. Valencia at Celta Vigo on Sunday. I put that in there because of Valencia still trying to avoid relegation. Then you got Atletico Madrid at Elche on Sunday, another top of the table versus relegation candidate, and Barcelona at Espanyol on Sunday. So you've got a lot of relegation candidates playing some of the best teams in the league, and this is also important because Barcelona are 1 win away from clinching La Liga. Or if Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid both drop points, Barcelona can clinch it that way as well. So this could be the weekend for Barcelona. All they need to do is beat Espanyol on Sunday. In Italy, Lecce at Lazio to get the weekend going on Friday. Lazio trying to kind of stop the bleeding, make sure they don't get dragged into this top 4 race. They're They're kind of one game away at this point. But if they win and other teams drop points, all of a sudden it looks a lot better. Atalanta at Salernitana on Saturday, AC Milan at Spezia Calcio on Saturday, Sassuolo at Inter on Saturday, Roma at Bologna on Sunday, and Cremonese at Juventus on Sunday. Those are all of your second through seventh place teams that are still all trying to make the Champions League. Germany, Freiburg at Union Berlin on Saturday. Freiburg kind of have this 2-game stretch that's going to be not final decisive, but very telling in terms of whether they're going to make the Champions League. Came up short against Leipzig. Now you got the opportunity against Union Berlin. Schalke at Bayern on Saturday. Schalke trying to stay up. Bayern trying to win the Bundesliga. Borussia Mönchengladbach at Borussia Dortmund on Saturday. Again, Dortmund, these home games, had no problem last weekend. Can they do it again? And Werder Bremen at RB Leipzig on Sunday. That is your other top 4 team who has really started to turn things around and is kind of putting the pressure on Freiburg and Union Berlin. In France, Reims at Lens on Friday. Lens currently in control of that second automatic qualifying spot for the automatic group stage spot for the Champions League. Ajaccio at PSG on Saturday. Lille at Monaco on Sunday. That's a big one at the top of the second tier of the table. And Angers at Marseille on Sunday. Marseille, the team trying to catch Lens. Then Major League Soccer, just a few games I want to highlight. Orlando City at Columbus on Saturday. 2 teams off to fairly decent starts in kind of a mess of an Eastern Conference once you get past the Revs in Cincinnati. Nashville at DC United on Saturday. Can DC United kind of keep up this good start? I'm very interested in DC United at this point. Then Hudson River Derby, NYCFC at New York Red Bulls on Saturday. Red Bulls obviously just fired Gerard Struber. NYCFC looking pretty good so far. And then finally, FC Dallas at Austin on Saturday. Another Texas Derby. Austin, it's not been great. Dallas, it's been pretty good. Can Austin start to turn this thing around? NWSL, Portland at Houston on Friday. Washington and Angel City on Saturday. San Diego Wave at Kansas City Current on Sunday. Those are the games I am looking out for this weekend. That is all for the weekend look ahead. That is all for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.